Nietzsche, Gnosticism, alchemy, Wagner. What do all these things have in common? They're all mentioned in Carl Gustav Jung's magnum opus, the Red Book, or Liber Novus. First, a little bit about this wonderful book. It was released in 2009, long after Jung's death, and the reason for this is that the heirs of Jung's estate, his grandsons, are very conservative Swiss gentlemen who were afraid that the material in the book would serve as fodder for Jung's detractors. The nature of the paintings and the writing itself is so visionary that it may lead some to question Jung's sanity. Jung built a tower on Lake Zurich in which to write this book, and he would go through periods of automatic writing in which he would induce hallucination voluntarily, and he would record his adventures with this strange medium and kept a book, and in it it was called the Black Book. He later transferred this to beautiful German calligraphy and painstakingly rendered paintings. Jung strongly believed that which is denied gains power and manifests in strange and spectacular ways, or as British occultist and author Peter Carroll would say, a god denied is a demon born. So this we can see if we look at people who repress elements of their sexuality. It usually leads to deviant behavior. And we see this with the Catholic priests and their unnatural vow of celibacy. Jung believed that the German soul suffered a schism when Christianity was introduced into Germany. So the heroic, chivalrous elements of the German soul was repressed, and a veneer of civility was cultivated instead. And anything that's denied gains power. And when people deny their origins because of what Jung believed was the timid Mithraic residence of the Christ within the Germanic Heimat, or home, it's going to come back to haunt you. And so we see World War I and then World War II, the rise and fall of the Third Reich. Jung directly attributed this to the denial of the archetype he called Wotan, or Odin. And on a microcosmic level, Jung identified the hero of Wagner's ring operatic cycle along with Siegfried, or Sigurd in the Volsunga saga. There was sort of he believed that this hero needed to be slain in order to be reborn again anew. And this sounds curiously like the legends of Osiris and other solar deities. So I just wanted to read a few excerpts. There's 3 chapters in the book: Primus, Secundus, and then Scrutinies at the end, or Liber Tertius. And the first one is curiously similar to the book of Genesis in some ways, only there's many heathen and pagan references. I first wanted to show an image of the Egyptian dung beetle Kefra, along with Siegfried slain in the cave. Treacherous. Could have picked a better location. Oh. Blood shone at me from the red light of the crystal, and when I picked it up to discover its mystery, there laid the horror uncovered before me. In the depths of what is to come lay murder. The blonde hero lay slain. The black beetle is the death that is necessary for renewal. And so thereafter a new sun glowed, the sun of the depths, full of riddles, a son of the night. And as the rising sun of spring quickens the dead earth, so the son of the depths quickened the dead. And thus began the terrible struggle between light and darkness. Out of that burst the powerful and ever unvanquished source of blood. This was what come to me, which you now experience in your life, and it is even more than that. On the following night, however, I had a vision. I was with a youth in high mountains. It was before daybreak. The eastern sky was already light. Then Siegfried's horn resounded over the mountains with a jubilant sound. We knew that our mortal enemy was coming. We were armed and lurked beside a narrow rocky path to murder him. Then we saw him coming across the mountains on a chariot made of the bones of the dead. He drove boldly and magnificently over the steep rocks and arrived at the narrow path where we waited in hiding. As he came around the turn ahead of us, we fired at the same time, and he fell slain. Thereupon I turned to flee, and a terrible rain swept down. But after this I went through a torment unto death, and I felt certain that I must kill myself if I could not solve the riddle of the murder of the hero. Then the spirit of the depths came to me and spoke these words: "The highest truth is one and the same with the absurd." This statement saved me, and like rain after a long hot spell, it swept away everything in me which was too highly tense. Then I had a second vision. I saw a merry garden, in which forms walked clad in white silk, all covered in colored light, some reddish, the others bluish and greenish. I know I have stridden across the depths. Through guilt I have become a newborn. So, what does this mean, the death of the hero? If we look at the men who inspired the Nibelungenlied, which is the German version of the Volsunga saga, we see very different people than what Germany has become today. We see the chivalrous knights of old, the virtuous, the brave, the just. And this was denied, and Jung believed that the death of Siegfried was very symbolic of the repression of that heroic element within the German soul. And it's actually done more harm than good. So we go on throughout Liber Secundus, and I believe there's lots of Odinic imagery. Jung encounters the prophet Elijah, an older prophet-looking, wizened, sagacious man, and the woman Salome, who in the Old Testament danced around the head of John the Baptist. One could, and I come dangerously close to heresy, being a heathen, one could say that Elijah might be Odinic, and then Salome may be a Valkyrie, or one of Odin's battle maidens. And in one of his visions, Jung follows Elijah up to a precipice where he transforms into the dwarf Mim from Wagner's Ring operatic cycle, who is, of course, in Norse mythology, Mimir, from whose well Odin gave one of his eyes to take a sip. And so we have a direct Wagnerian and Norse mythology reference there. He goes on and he encounters a prisoner, and of course Odin is known as the god of the incarcerated, who dies in the middle of the night. So again we have a repetition of the death of the Wotanic and the rise of the false sense of civility that the Germans cultivated. He goes on and encounters an anchorite, or a monk in the desert. And so further we see archetypes that are of wisdom and knowledge, of whom Odin is the greatest, of course. He goes on and has a variety of encounters, and he begins to know his holy guardian angel, Philemon. The name is Greek, and Philemon explains several things to him: magic, mysticism, alchemical transfiguration. So this is just the first excerpt I wanted to get into. This book is deep on so many levels, and it's so multifaceted that it requires volumes to interpret the shortest passage, much like James Joyce's Ulysses. I find it really interesting that chapter 3, Scrutinies, is basically the words of Abraxas, the lion-headed Gnostic deity. He's got some very harsh words for young and for humanity. And just 10 years before, Aleister Crowley received the Book of the Law in Cairo, Egypt, and it also announces a new eon of religious thought and spiritual thought, and is very critical of humanity, and basically relegates humanity to naive children. So 1904, we got the Book of the Law. In 1913, Jung was undergoing automatic writing and recording them, transferring it to beautiful German calligraphy. I wanted to talk a little bit about amplification. Amplification was Jung's method of drawing together vast amounts of folklore and mythology to get at their common essence. And again, I flirt with heresy here as a heathen and someone oath to Odin. But if we look at the origins of various mythological systems, we see startling similarities. In the Kabbalistic tree of life, the first path connecting the Sephiro is Aleph. And Aleph is a Hebrew letter, and there's a table of correspondences which is rather exhaustive. But suffice it to say that Aleph, literal meaning, was cattle related. If you look at the first two runes of the Elder Futhark, you see again that bovine imagery. Fehu, which means wealth and also means cattle, and then Uruz, which is an auroch, or it's an extinct bovine animal. So the very first two runes have a similar essence to the Hebrew letter Aleph. And the runes, of course, may be Etruscan in origin. So we can't really say that there's no connection there. We can't really say, this way is better or more wizened than this, because the essence is so similar. And I think that's about it for today.